Good morning and welcome to Words That Matter, a modern day book club. I'm your host, Lee Smith. A very special show today. We're going to be speaking with former Assistant Attorney General in the Donald J. Trump administration. This man's name is Jeffrey Clark. He's spoken with us before. Very important figure, great guy. And of course, he's in the middle of the Fulton County, Georgia case. Brought against Trump and a number of other figures in Donald Trump's circle. And Jeff has been brought into that. Now he's also undergoing disciplinary proceedings in front of the Washington, D.C. bar. It's part of the larger lawfare campaign targeting not just Donald Trump, but conservatives and the right around the country. Part of it, again, is to hurt Donald Trump affiliated figures. But again, it's also to strip away legal representation from a lot of Americans. It's to intimidate lawyers, to intimidate Americans. And we're going to be speaking about a book that Jeff has been reading lately and that he thinks shines some light on what's going on right now in the country. The name of the book is National Security and Double Government. It was published a little more than a decade ago by a gentleman, Michael J. Glennon. And so Jeff is going to be speaking about that a bit, as well as other things, including bringing us up to date on his cases and what he thinks is important right now, not only the cases, but for the country moving forward. So welcome, Jeffrey Clark. Jeff, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, Lee, thanks for having me back again, and now on your new program that's focused on books and how books are applying to topics in contemporary affairs.
Yeah, I think it really helps. It helps people give some background and some context to what's going on. The news is one thing, and of course, we know with our news media, it's not giving any context. It's just framing it. It's just framing it to hurt one political party and advance the interests and power of the other party. So really looking into books, I think, really helps shape it. And you were talking about this book in conversations offline. Why do you think that this book, National Security and Double Government, what does this tell us about what's going on right now?
Sure, Lee. So the double government part is really the generalized frame that I think folks should read the book for, because you can apply it to more than just the national security sphere. The author's focused on the national security sphere, and he's actually an academic or an academically minded gentleman who's on the left. And he was puzzled by the fact that you have Bush 43, you have, the Iraq War, you have the preemptive war concept, you have the neocons come in, and then, you have the Obama administration succeed it. And yet he didn't, in his own mind, think that there was enough change in the national security / foreign policy space that would seem to be explained by the kinds of positions and the kinds of rhetoric and where both of those two different presidents came from. And he wanted to try to understand why. And so he developed a thesis that what is really dominating these kinds of national security and foreign policy issues is a kind of deep state. He doesn't call it that, but a state that is of career officials, some of whom straddle government because they're in think tanks or they go back and forth between government, or they're in elite forms of media, more like, the New York Review of Books types and foreign policy journals and the like, right? That they're the ones who provide and explain the stability as to why, different presidents have very different speeches that they give and positions that they say that they take, but then, they're actually in many cases just producing kind of homogenized policy. And so his book, the thesis behind answering that issue is that you have this sort of background superstructure that's behind all of it. And that it is the reason why it's double government is because we have a facial form of government that he calls Madisonian, which is based on the three branches of government, on separation of powers and federalism and inter-branch jostling. But in reality, you have in the background the second form of government, which he calls Trumanite, which began in the late 40s, and that Trumanite government is really the way most of American government is done these days. And I can testify from having been in two different presidential administrations, the Bush 43 administration and the Trump administration, that there's a lot of truth to this. That certainly this is the way the career officials think. There's a famous British show that I'm fond of, comedy show called Yes Minister, where it's the career officials who are really running the show, and the ministers are the ones who appear to be in charge, but they're not actually in charge, and they're very dependent on that career bureaucracy. And if you wanted to be a political appointee and go through the world, even in a Bush 43 or a Trump administration, and act like that, you could easily defer to your career people. They're very happy to do everything for you, to serve it up to you on a silver platter, and to just ask you to sign things and to be a kind of ministerial presider in chief over what they're doing. And what they react negatively to, and you find a lot of resistance to, is when you start to say, oh, no, I'm going to take the reins and we're going to move this in a direction. And the direction we're going to try to move it in is in a direction of the Madisonian government, a direction that is ultimately accountable to the American people. That's when you find yourself in trouble. And I think actually that's one of the reasons why I find myself under assault in multiple different forums.
Well, Jeff, this is really interesting. And you fought this, what we're calling double government, what you just described as a Trumanite style government. You fought it when you were in the Trump administration, and now you're fighting it. Now you're fighting it in civilian life. A lot of us have an impression, I include myself, that actually, that this deep state, administrative state, whatever we want to call it, is so closely aligned with the Democratic Party that it appears that sometimes Democratic Party figures are leading it. For instance, with Russiagate, right? These were all Barack Obama spy chiefs, James Comey and John Brennan. So a lot of people, and of course, it was all based on a Hillary Clinton campaign dirty trick. So I guess my question is, does this deep state, it has a mind of its own, so it doesn't actually need leadership from the political sphere, even insofar as it's aligned with the Democratic Party? Is it possible for the deep state just to do all this stuff all on its own?
It is, and as the author Glennon explains, I think persuasively, it's not as if there really is a kind of deep evil genius, a man, bald man in a high backed leather chair stroking a white cat, right? It's much more that it's kind of a collective entity. It's like a thing, or it's what Mike Benz calls a blob or multiple blobs. And a lot of what drives them is risk aversion, right? And I think that's what we're seeing play out in this whole FISA fight, that you can have Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, say, look, we really need to get, control of this situation. Many have talked about having a warrant requirement because, for gosh sakes, the Madisonian government, the Fourth Amendment requires warrants to be obtained, right? But then he goes in and he gets a secret briefing in a SCIF, a secured, compartmented facility, and he comes out of it and says, oh, now I have a different view. We really need to maintain FISA pretty much as it is, with some kind of window dressing on the sides. And, I think the explanation for that in part is that this deep state, this national security deep state, they just will reinforce that, look, if there's a terrorism incident on your watch after you've watered down FISA, your name is going to be mud. You're going to go down in history as a weak man. And this causes a lot of people to recoil from actually requiring obeying and adhering to our Constitution as it's actually written.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I mean, that's been one of the powers that this structure has had certainly since 9/11. Anyone who would try to go after the intelligence services would be threatened. It's like, well, look, if there's another 9/11, your name's all over it. You're going to pay. Your career's all over. And everyone's going to hate you because they're going to blame it on you for this. Do you think that what's going on now, the way that the way that this deep state has gone after you, is it because you were associated with Trump, or is it because that you fought them? Is it just like, well, look, this is the lesson. We're going to make a lesson out of Jeffrey Clark. He tried to take us on, and so now we're going to tear him apart in front of the DC bar. We're going to take it to Fulton County, Georgia, as well. I mean, just an aside. I mean, that's one of the shocking things. The DC bar, right? That's part of the DC. That's part of the DC infrastructure, right? Federal government infrastructure. But Fulton County, Georgia, I think that's surprising too, because that suggests that its reach is much broader than Washington, D.C.
So, Lee, I think the answer to your first intro part of that question is both. That if you are someone who wants to help the most paradigm shifting and challenging president in certainly my lifetime, and I think for quite a long time even before that, then you're going to have a target painted on your back. And then second, if you do disagree with this Trumanite state, you're going to come under attack. And look, I can't talk about things that are classified, but as the Trump administration was coming to a close, there were two efforts to get me involved in very prominent issues with a lot of classified information, and to get me to come down on the side of the Trumanite state, which I refused to do in both instances. And so I think that gives them the measure of me, and they don't like that, right? They want to give these briefings and then have you say, "Oh, well, now that I understand that, surely you're right, and we don't need to make any changes." And I had exactly the opposite reaction to both of those things. And, more eventually will come out about that, Lee, but, let me just sort of leave that as a tantalizer for now. And then you raise the issue of what about DC and what about Fulton County? So DC is a federal enclave, right? It's reports to, Congress holds the ultimate whip hand there, but they created home rule. And the home rule is, dominated by the Democrat Party. I mean, there really is no Republican influence in that government. There are presidentially appointed, and so Trump put some judges on the two local courts that are in DC. But they tend to be folks who are not the kinds of folks who wind up, say, on the Third Circuit, or certainly not the Fifth Circuit, right? It tends to be people who are much more in the DC oriented mainstream, even if they are Republicans, when we have Republican appointees. And of course, there are a number of Democrat appointees. And it's an Article 1 set of courts that rule in DC. It's not an Article 3 set of courts. So they have terms, and those terms can be extended. But they're essentially a creature of Congress. And so one of the things about that whole sort of superstructure coming after me is that they're reportable to Congress. They're not something that is an independent branch like the Article 3 judges who have lifetime tenure and whose salaries can't be reduced. So those folks reacted to the fact that Senator Durbin filed an ethics complaint against me, and then sort of away we go, right? And they're very responsive to that because they know what side of the bread, they get the butter on. And then as to Georgia, right, that is something that they have less control of as a general matter over the state. But Fulton County, Georgia, which is where the case is coming out of, is super Democratic. It's another, Democratic, kind of monopoly, largely controlled area. And, it came out in one of the proceedings down in Fulton County that there are documents being exchanged between Fulton County and the White House counsel's office, for instance. And I can't see those documents. I have very strong suspicions that Fulton County was coordinating with the Biden administration. And the New York Times had even reported that they had sought to have some former DOJ officials, folks who are kind of members more of this Trumanite form of government, who I opposed and who opposed me. And their testimony was sought by Fani Willis down in Fulton County. And the Justice Department refused to give authorization for that. And so we asked to see the documentation on that. Let's see what the Justice Department said. What was their rationale? And Fani Willis won't give it to us. We suspect because it takes the position essentially that the Fulton County, Georgia can't regulate what's going on in the Article 2 executive branch. And, we'll decide as we see fit whether to allow our former officials to go down there. But if that's true, then my immunity defenses should be granted. And of course, they don't want to feed my immunity defenses, so they're keeping the documents locked up. And sadly, I have to report to you that as to both sets of documents, both Justice Department documents related to me and White House counsel office documents related to me and potential coordination with Fani Willis, the judge has sealed them up and nobody can see them at this point. So, it's truly remarkable to me. And I think that it shows that this, Trumanite state, it's even penetrated into the states and local governments at this point, Lee.
We have to take a quick break. Jeff, when we come back, I want to ask how, the book here, as you said, is by a liberal. And we're talking about Democratic Party enclaves here, Atlanta, Washington, D.C. When we come back, I want to ask how it happened that the Democratic Party became the political wing of the deep state. For people who are watching right now on YouTube, we're going to cut away, go to Epoch TV exclusively. Please watch us on Epoch TV exclusively, having a very important conversation with Donald Trump, Assistant Attorney General Jeffrey Clark. We'll be back in less than a minute. Make sure you make the jump.
What we've had since the 1950s is the CIA leaking to the news media here and building the careers of big journalists, mainly liberal journalists.
How the media and how the intelligence services have kind of intersected in strange ways.
What you have today is a wokeness that's permeated the whole intelligence community, but especially the CIA and the FBI. If you want to advance now, you have to subscribe to this. You get retired FBI people or CIA people and senior anonymous current ones endorsing the book and the products and saying, yes, this is a good writer. And so building the careers of these people who then become completely dependent on our intelligence community for their careers.